I went to a business dinner with my boss, nothing extraordinary, just another one of those nights where smiles are forced, glasses clink in false toasts and words flow full of disguised intentions. But that night, something that should have been just another boring appointment became the crack that split my world in two. At the next table, amidst muffled laughter and intimate gestures that only those who have experienced it can identify, my wife was with another man. It wasn't a meeting of friends, there was none of the lightness of friendship, there was desire, complicity, sin in the gaze. I stood up, my feet walked without my mind following, as if something inside me needed to see up close, to confirm with its own eyes the pain that was already burning in my stomach. When I got to their table, she turned pale, as if she had seen a ghost, and in a desperate act she stammered that he was just an old acquaintance, a friend from college, something like that. But her eyes couldn't sustain the lie. The mask fell. And her silence after that was more deafening than any scream of confession. At that moment, everything inside me screamed. It screamed like someone watching a castle crumble in slow motion. Because betrayal isn't just a body that leaves. It's the future you built being erased with a fake laugh, it's the scent of the person you love impregnated in someone else. It's thinking about all the times you gave up on yourself for someone who, in the end, was saving the best of themselves for someone else. But I didn't make a fuss. I didn't slap the table. I didn't spill the wine she was drinking. I didn't drag anyone by the collar. I just looked. I looked with everything I had inside me. I looked until she lowered her eyes and realized that the world she was destroying was the same one I had fought to keep standing for so many years. When she tried to justify herself, I just said, "No need." I already understood everything. The return home was silent. And I, who always believed that the worst pain was death, discovered that there is something even more devastating, knowing that someone had the courage to look you in the eye for years, lying every day, smiling while betraying your every gesture. The bed we shared now seemed like a graveyard of promises. The pictures on the wall, the trips, the laughter, everything seemed like a poorly staged play. That early morning, I sat on the porch and let the silence swallow me. I remembered all the birthdays I celebrated alone because she had a meeting, all the nights I slept facing her side waiting for her to come back from Pilates, all the Sundays I waited for a caress that never came. And I began to understand, with each memory, that the betrayal had been going on for a long time, only now it had become impossible to hide. She tried to reach me the next day. She called me dozens of times. She sent messages with empty phrases, "We need to talk, you're misunderstanding, it wasn't what it seemed." It wasn't what it seemed. So what was it? A play? A rehearsal? An experiment? With each word, I felt the venom spreading further. She even came to my door, crying. She screamed my name. She said she made a mistake, that she got confused, that she still loved me. But what she didn't realize, and perhaps she never will, is that betrayal doesn't begin when two mouths meet, but when two hearts diverge. And hers hadn't walked with me for a long time. The strangest thing was that, instead of anger, I started to feel sorry. Because deep down, she lost more than I did. She lost a home, she lost peace, she lost someone who truly loved her, flaws and all. I lost a dream, yes. But she lost the only place where she was truly accepted. And maybe that hurts more. I moved on. Or at least I tried. I put away the photos, packed up the picture frames, moved the furniture around. Little by little, I started to exchange the pain for silence, the resentment for indifference. And before I knew it, I was laughing again. Meeting other people. Looking in the mirror and liking what I saw. But fate, as always, has its ironies. A few months later, I saw her again. By accident. And what happened at that reunion changed everything. What she did that night, the way she reacted when she saw me with someone else, was the true fall of her mask. Because until that moment, she still carried the hope that I would come back. That it had all been just a phase. That time would heal and I would return to her arms like a fool in love. But at that reunion, I was no longer the same. And she knew it. She knew it in my eyes. She knew it in my silence. I knew it in the smile of the woman beside me. It was there, at that moment, that the penny dropped. That betrayal has a price. That true love, once betrayed, does not return. That regret comes too late when the other person has already learned to live without you. She tried to get closer, asked for a minute, wanted to talk. But there was no more talking. She wanted to say that she still loved me. But her love was useless now. I just said, "You are no longer the woman I loved. Good luck with him. You will need it." And I left. For the first time, with a light chest. But there is something that no one knows. Something that happened the last time she tried to look for me. A secret that I have kept to this day. And it is this secret that changes everything. Because despite everything, there is a hidden detail in this story. A detail that she never imagined I knew. Something that makes all this betrayal have even more weight. A detail that she would never have the courage to confess. But that I discovered in the most unexpected way possible. And when you know what it is, maybe you will understand why I never looked back. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and never romanticize betrayal. The stories told are fiction, but inspired by realities that destroy homes, hearts and futures. Our goal is to show the real weight of a wrong choice, and how betrayal can leave deep and irreversible scars. Now settle in. Because what you're about to hear is a shocking story. Get ready. Jonathan was always a man of firm habits and a discreet presence. At 42 years old, he had the calm look of someone who built his own life with effort and perseverance. He was the financial manager of a medium-sized multinational, one of those positions that doesn't immediately impress, but that firmly supports the entire machinery behind the numbers. He didn't like to show off, nor did he have many friends. What he appreciated most was the feeling of balance, order, and predictability. He was proud to say that he had done everything right. He studied, worked, got married, bought his house with a garden, and built a stable life with the person he believed to be the love of his life. Amanda came into his life like a gentle breeze and settled in like someone who puts down roots without warning. She had restless eyes, an engaging smile, and a sweet way of speaking that made any room feel lighter. When they met, she was working as a cultural project coordinator, full of ideas and plans. She was the opposite of Jonathan in many ways, impulsive, creative, driven by emotions. But perhaps it was precisely this difference that brought them together in the beginning. He offered structure, she offered color. Amanda was the kind of woman who celebrated her anniversary every month in the first year and who wrote notes by hand instead of sending text messages. For a long time, Jonathan felt privileged to have someone like her by his side, someone who saw beauty in the little things and who made a point of celebrating the smallest details of everyday life. They complemented each other in an almost cinematic way, and in the eyes of others, they were the ideal couple. The house they lived in was hand-picked. Amanda said she wanted a balcony where she could drink coffee listening to the birds and a large kitchen where she could cook with love. Jonathan just wanted silence, space and security. When they found the perfect house, it was like a dream come true. They painted the walls together, chose the furniture calmly, and transformed each room into an extension of who they were as a couple. There were paintings with inspirational quotes on the walls, books stacked in strategic corners and a bookshelf full of photo frames with happy memories. The house breathed affection, even when time began to put small cracks in the invisible walls between them. In the early years, the differences between them seemed charming. Jonathan was amused by Amanda's absent-minded way of forgetting to turn the oven on or losing her keys around the house. Amanda found the methodical way he folded his shirts or organized his cutlery funny. They laughed about it together, and their arguments always ended in long hugs and promises that they loved each other above all else. But like any routine that is established, this one also began to become a stage for small frustrations. Time, subtle and cruel, revealed that not all differences are easy to manage when days stop being special and become just ordinary. Amanda began to miss something that even she herself could not define. Jonathan began to feel distant from her without understanding exactly why. There was love, yes, but now it seemed quieter. They no longer wrote notes, they no longer celebrated each month. Romantic dinners became rare, replaced by quick meals while watching the news. Jonathan was still present, but absent in his gestures. Amanda continued to dream, but quieter. When asked, she said she was just tired, but her gaze revealed a deeper weariness, a kind of accompanied loneliness. Even so, there was still affection, respect, and the kind of connection that only time builds. Apparently, love was just maturing, transforming. Or at least that was what Jonathan preferred to believe. On weekends, he liked to tend to the garden while she painted in her makeshift studio. They had long conversations about the past, about the things they had experienced together. They laughed as they remembered the financial difficulties of the beginning, the aimless car trips, the sleepless nights assembling cheap furniture. There was nostalgia in her words, and pride in his eyes. But the present no longer seemed to have the same strength. Jonathan tried to rekindle this in practical ways, a surprise trip, a dinner at her favorite restaurant, an attempt to reconnect what seemed scattered. Amanda thanked him, smiled, but the sparkle in her eyes did not return completely. She was there, but not whole. Still, Jonathan didn't see this as a marital crisis. He saw it as a phase. He believed that every couple went through ups and downs and that, with time and dedication, everything would balance out again. He wasn't a man of outbursts or rash decisions. He was patient and trusted in what they had built. I was sure that love was stronger than any passing shadow. And Amanda, in turn, tried to convince herself that the emptiness inside her was the result of some kind of tiredness, of a grueling routine. She found herself feeling guilty for not feeling as excited as before, for not eagerly awaiting Jonathan's return from work, for preferring silence to dialogue. But she continued to be by his side, sleeping in the same bed, saying, "I love you," even on the days when she didn't feel so sure. She wanted to believe that it was just a phase too. At the company, Jonathan was respected for his ethical stance and professionalism. He was about to be promoted to a more visible position, something that could change his routine and even bring new possibilities to his life and marriage. Amanda supported him, but with an almost imperceptible emotional distance. She didn't vibrate with him like before, she didn't make plans with such enthusiasm. She said she was happy for him, but her joy seemed rehearsed, and this began to make him uneasy. Still, he never confronted her. It wasn't in his nature to pressure. He preferred to believe, once again, that it was just a moment. They had few close friends, but enough to guarantee occasional dinners, shared birthdays and comfortable conversations. People saw them as an exemplary couple, the kind that overcame the difficulties of time and remained strong. Little did they know that, behind their appearances, there was a kind of suffocating silence slowly growing. And perhaps the saddest thing was that not even they knew for sure what was wrong. Amanda smiled in photos, was affectionate in public, but inside she felt increasingly distant from herself. Jonathan, for his part, noticed the gestures, the colder touches, the more distracted looks, but preferred to keep quiet. Jonathan's parents always taught him that lasting marriages were made of resilience, and he followed this principle steadfastly. He never considered giving up. He never raised his voice. He was the type of person who, when faced with a problem, tried to understand it before reacting. Amanda was raised with a different vision. She believed that love needed to be alive, vibrant, full of new things. She grew up watching her mother lose herself in a marriage without affection, and promised herself that she would never experience the same thing. The clash between these visions began to weigh on her, even if it was not verbalized. While he thought that everything would pass, she began to question whether it was worth continuing to wait for something that might never be the same again. Despite this, they shared genuine moments of tenderness. There were nights when, lying side by side, they talked about children who never came, about trips they still wanted to take, about books they read together. At these times, Amanda felt a pang of longing for the woman she had been when it all began. Jonathan, on the other hand, felt a glimmer of hope, thinking that perhaps what was dying just needed to be watered. And so they continued, between silences and attempts, between memories and expectations, walking together without realizing that, little by little, they were heading down different paths. Until an invitation to a business dinner would change the course of everything. And nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks that followed were marked by a sequence of events that seemed to announce something invisible but imminent. Jonathan woke up every day with a tightness in his chest that he couldn't name. His work demanded more of him than usual, since his promotion was being consolidated, and this kept him busy for long hours away from home. Amanda, on the other hand, immersed herself in an almost parallel routine, as if she had created her own universe. She started going to different cafes again, started saying that she needed more time alone to paint, started hanging out with new colleagues from an artistic expression course that she decided to start on impulse, claiming that she needed creative stimulation. Jonathan, always understanding, supported the idea without hesitation, but he couldn't help but notice that something had changed in the frequency with which she looked him in the eyes. There was a rush in her gestures, as if she was always trying to escape from something that not even he could reach. Dinners together became rare. Amanda often said she wasn't hungry, or preferred to eat later, when he was already in bed. Her cell phone now seemed to be part of her body, always close by, never unlocked in his sight. Jonathan was the type of person who avoided assumptions. He had never been a jealous man, but little by little the gaps began to accumulate and became impossible to ignore. He found himself wondering where she was exactly at that time, who she was talking to, what she was feeling. He would even stand in front of the bedroom, watching the closed door, listening to her voice on the phone, always low, always full of contained smiles that were no longer meant for him. It ate away at him slowly and relentlessly. One night, Amanda arrived home later than usual, her hair slightly disheveled, her skin glowing differently, as if she had laughed too much, lived too much. Jonathan was waiting for her in the living room, a glass of wine in his hand and a tense look in his eyes. He asked her if something had happened, and she responded with disconcerting ease, saying that the group from the course had gone to the bar after class to talk about art and that she had lost track of time. Her response was quick, her gestures gentle, but the lack of details was glaring. He didn't confront her, he just nodded, put the glass away, and said he was going to bed. She watched him go up the stairs and stood there, motionless, staring into space, as if she knew a crack had formed in the floor. Jonathan tried to smother the pain with work. Meetings became refuges. The promotion brought him more prestige, more responsibilities, and a series of new social engagements that he had previously avoided. He began going out with his boss to business dinners, began attending networking events, and for the first time in years, felt that his presence was valued outside of the home in a tangible way. Amanda didn't show much interest, she listened politely, but her eyes always seemed to be elsewhere. When he arrived with 2 invitations to an exclusive dinner hosted by a group of businessmen, he expected her to decline, as she had been doing lately. But to his surprise, she accepted immediately. She said she wanted to go with him, that it had been a while since they had gone out together, and even suggested the dress he could wear. He was touched by the gesture, imagining that perhaps it was a sign that she still cared, that there was still something to be redeemed. He spent the following days imagining that night as a possible new beginning. On the night of the event, Amanda came down the stairs ready to leave, and for a moment Jonathan watched her in silence, as they had on their first dates. She was beautiful, impeccable, but there was something in her eyes that didn't match the shine of her dress. Something he couldn't understand at the time, but that would stay with him for the rest of the night. The restaurant was sophisticated, the guests elegant, and the conversation revolved around investments, markets, partnerships. Amanda seemed a little out of place at first, but soon relaxed, as if she was used to that kind of environment. Jonathan felt proud of her, but also confused. She smiled a lot, her posture was confident, her words were precise. As if she were introducing herself to someone. But he couldn't identify who. During dessert, while talking to a banking executive, Jonathan noticed that Amanda was restless. Her gaze wandered around the tables, as if searching for something or someone. Until, in an instinctive gesture, he followed her gaze and saw. 2 tables away, sitting side by side, were a discreet-looking man with restless hands and a young woman who was talking to him with visible enthusiasm. But the man's gaze was not on her. It was fixed on Amanda. And she returned it with the same intensity. Their eyes met for a few seconds, but they said everything. Jonathan felt the world stop. His breathing became heavy, the environment around him dissolved, and he knew. He knew without needing proof, words, or confessions. He knew with the certainty of someone who knows someone's personality deeply. That exchange of glances carried intimacy. It wasn't from now. It was from before. It was from someone who had already touched, if desired, if secretly belonged. He stood up and walked over to their table as if in a trance. His presence interrupted the conversation of the couple next to him. Amanda saw him approach and her body stiffened, her smile died, her face lost color. The man in front of her tried to compose himself, but his discomfort was evident. Jonathan stopped in front of the table and, without raising his voice, just looked into her eyes. Amanda tried to hold his gaze, tried to smile, tried to hide it. But she couldn't. She said something about coincidence, that he was just an old friend, that they had arranged to meet by chance, that there was nothing wrong. But her voice was shaking. Her hands were sweating. Her mask, no matter how much she resisted, began to fall in the face of his silence. Because Jonathan didn't say a word. He didn't shout, he didn't ask, he didn't accuse. He just looked. And it was that look that broke her. It was there, in front of everyone, that the truth imposed itself without needing to be spoken. Amanda tried to justify herself, tried to touch his arm, but he backed away with the same calmness of someone who had already understood everything. He said that it was not the time for conversations, that nothing more needed to be said. He returned to his desk, thanked his boss for the company and told him that he had to leave. Amanda stayed behind, like a child caught in a serious mistake. Her lover remained silent, unable to act. They drove home in separate cars. And that night, when he arrived home alone, Jonathan walked to the porch, looked at the garden he had cared for so much and sat in silence, his hands on his face. The tears did not come. The crying seemed too small compared to what he was feeling. It was more than pain. It was the collapse of what he believed was immune to falling. Later, Amanda arrived. She was nervous, shaky, her makeup smeared. She tried to explain, tried to rewrite the facts, tried to justify the unjustifiable. Jonathan listened, but his soul was no longer there. He said he needed space, asked her to respect his time, and went up to the bedroom. Amanda was left alone in the living room, sitting in the dark, staring at the reflection of her own image in the window. For the first time, she saw the emptiness she had created. For the first time, she understood that, even without screaming, he was leaving in a way that she could not stop. And yet, there was something she didn't know. Something he'd never told her. Something that would make this betrayal even more bitter. And that secret was about to come to light. The night was long and sleepless. Jonathan lay in one of the guest rooms, staring at the ceiling as if searching for answers in the silent white. Amanda didn't try to invade that space. For the first time in years, she understood that her presence was invasive. In the morning, the usual sounds of the house seemed out of place, the hiss of the shower, the whistle of the coffee maker, the light footsteps on the stairs. Jonathan came down calmly, as if wearing invisible armor. He sat at the table, took a sip of coffee, and when he looked up he found Amanda standing in front of him, holding a cup with trembling hands. She asked to talk, said she couldn't stand the silence anymore, that she needed to explain, needed to be heard. Jonathan took a deep breath and said he would listen to everything, but that at the end of the conversation, he would also say something, something she didn't know, something that would change everything. Amanda began slowly, choosing her words as if she were stepping on broken glass. She said she didn't know when things had started to fall apart between them, but that she had felt invisible, forgotten, alone in a marriage that seemed increasingly mechanical. She said she had never wanted to hurt him, that what had happened was an impulse, a moment of emotional weakness, that she had regretted it. He remained silent, his eyes fixed on her, his expression unwavering. Amanda continued, telling how she had met that man in one of her art classes, how he had listened to her when she had opened up, how they had grown closer without realizing it, how their encounters had started out small, then became more frequent, more intimate. She tried to show that it had never been about love, that it was just a reflection of the absence she felt at home. But as she spoke, her voice lost strength. Her justification seemed fragile even to her own ears. Jonathan then stood up and went to a drawer in the living room. He took out a thick envelope, which seemed too heavy for the thin paper that held it. He placed the envelope on the table and said that she didn't need to open it right now, but that she should know the contents. Amanda, startled, asked what it was. Jonathan sat down again, looked at her with eyes full of contained pain and said in a firm voice that 3 months ago he discovered that he was being cheated on. Not by chance, not by intuition, but by evidence. A mutual friend, with no intention of getting involved, saw Amanda in a cafe with the man, holding hands, laughing intimately. Days later, Jonathan hired an investigator. Photos, captured messages, recordings. Everything was there. He knew everything. And he said nothing. Because he needed to understand, because he wanted to see how far she would go, if she would have the courage to tell him, to admit it, or if she would prefer to continue living the theater. Amanda went pale. She tried to mumble something, but he continued. He said he hadn't confronted her before because he wanted to see how far she would go. And that at that dinner, when their eyes met that of the other man, it wasn't then that he knew, it was only the moment he stopped pretending he didn't know. Amanda stepped back, put her hands over her mouth, her eyes already filled with tears, and begged him to listen to her, but Jonathan interrupted. He said there was more. Much more. Jonathan said that weeks before discovering the betrayal, he had bought 2 tickets for a special trip. He would take her to the same place where they had spent their honeymoon. He wanted to rekindle something, give her a surprise. That same week, he found messages on her computer that she had exchanged with her lover. Declarations, plans, lies. But what hit him the most was what he discovered later. He said that, when he was looking through the files saved in the cloud, he found a draft of a text written by Amanda. A diary. Raw words. She wrote about what she felt for that man, about how much he made her feel alive, about how Jonathan was predictable, monotonous, a good man, but boring. She wrote that she felt suffocated by stability. And that she didn't know how to say that she wanted more from life than that dull routine. Amanda cried, unable to contain her sobs. She apologized, said she never wanted him to read that it was just her venting about confusing moments. Jonathan nodded. He said he understood. But it didn't end there. There was still what he had promised to say. The part she didn't know. The secret he had kept until that moment. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his eyes red, but his voice firm. And then, with a coldness she had never seen in him, he said that dinner that night was no coincidence. That he knew she would be there with her lover. That he had been the one to organize that dinner. That he had invited the boss to that restaurant, on that date, precisely because he had learned, through the investigator, that Amanda and her lover usually met there on Wednesdays. That he wanted to see her with his own eyes, he wanted to witness the lie, he wanted to be there to see her mask fall. And that everything, absolutely everything, had been planned. Amanda broke down. She asked him why he did that, why he set her up like that, why he didn't just confront her. Jonathan replied that, at that moment, he needed to be sure that the love was over. He needed to free himself from doubt. And seeing her there, lying with her eyes in the middle of the restaurant, confirmed everything. And that, since then, everything had changed for him. Jonathan took a deep breath and, with cruel calm, revealed the final blow. While she was living that lie, he had gotten closer to someone from the past. Not an affair, not revenge. But someone who, unlike her, had never lied. Who had appeared by chance, without pretensions. Who had been there in the most difficult moments, who had listened to him, who had hugged him without asking, who had made him smile again. And that week, he had made the decision to move on. Not out of anger. But because, for the first time in years, he felt free. Amanda tried to argue, tried to hold on to the edge of some hope, but there was nothing left. Jonathan said he didn't hate her. That her betrayal had hurt like nothing else, but that now, looking at her there, in tears, he understood that maybe the pain was a gift. Because it freed him from the illusion. And that, from that moment on, he no longer wanted to fight for something that only existed inside him. That she was free to live as she wanted. But that with him, everything was over. Amanda fell to her knees on the living room floor. She cried like someone who had lost all ground. She begged him to give her a chance, she said she loved him, that she was confused, that she now saw her mistake, that she would do anything to start over. But he was already standing up, walking towards the door, leaving behind not only a woman, but the life he believed he had built with her. In that silent exit, Amanda knew that, for the first time, he would not come back. And deep down, she knew that she would never have back what she had destroyed with her own hands. Jonathan left the house without looking back. He walked to the car as if he were shedding an old skin, took a deep breath before getting in, and remained inside for a few minutes, just staring at the steering wheel with his hands firmly on it. His heart was pounding, no longer with pain, but with an intense restlessness, as if the silence was shouting truths that he still didn't know how to process. There was no anger, no relief. There was a hole, yes, but it wasn't the same emptiness as days ago. It was a different kind of silence, a silence after the storm, where the rumblings stop and all that's left is the dust settling, the debris scattered on the ground, and the feeling that one must move on, even without knowing where to go. He drove aimlessly, crossing streets he knew with his eyes closed, until he found himself in front of a park he had frequented years ago, when he still tried to run in the mornings and believed his body could handle the weight of his emotions. He parked, got out, and walked to a bench under the trees. It was a calm, windy afternoon, the sky opaque. People passed by him distractedly, laughing, running, living, oblivious to the collapse he had just left behind. And there, sitting among dry leaves, Jonathan thought about what his next step would be. Because now there was no us anymore. There was only him. And a life that needed to be reorganized from the rubble. Meanwhile, Amanda was sitting on the floor of the living room, still in the same spot where he had left her. Daylight invaded the room cruelly, revealing the disorder around her, papers thrown around, the broken cup, the envelope still sealed on the table. She couldn't move. Every muscle in her body felt numb. Her head throbbed between flashes of the conversation, the confession, his departure. The pain was now tangible, physical, an open wound. She stood up slowly, walked over to the envelope, hesitated for a few seconds, and then opened it. The photos jumped out at her like knives, her and the other man holding hands, laughing, getting into the car, sitting in cafes. She saw herself through the eyes of the outside world, and it was then that guilt tore at her furiously. This wasn't just a mistake, it wasn't an affair. This had a face, a name, a consequence. And Jonathan, silent, had been the only one who kept her dignity standing while she crumbled. In the days that followed, the silence continued. Jonathan didn't come home. Amanda texted him every day, but he didn't answer. He tried calling, writing letters, even knocking on the door of a friend's old apartment in the hopes of finding him. But Jonathan had disappeared from the routine they once shared. And it was in this disappearance that Amanda began to revisit everything. She opened old boxes, reread letters from him, listened to old messages on his cell phone. And she cried. She cried until she could no longer keep her eyes open. For the first time, he understood what he had done. Not just what I had lost. But what she had destroyed in someone who had only given her love. Jonathan, on the other hand, had stayed in a simple, discreet hotel near a bookstore he used to frequent. He spent his days working remotely, avoiding social contact. At night, he walked down random streets listening to old songs on his headphones. The pain was now silent, but real. It was no longer despair, it was mourning. And in the midst of this solitary routine, he ended up bumping into someone he hadn't seen in years, in an absolutely unlikely way. Sophia. They had been friends in their youth, with those sincere and unpromising bonds. She worked as a family therapist, was there for a conference, and when they met in the hotel lobby, the surprise was genuine. Her eyes lit up. His hesitated, but accepted the meeting. That night, they went to dinner together at a small restaurant with low lighting and simple dishes. At first, Jonathan didn't want to tell her anything. But she was too sensitive, she could see the emotional exhaustion in his eyes, and gently made room for him to talk. And he did. He told her everything. About love, about routine, about betrayal, about revelation, about pain, about the fall. Sophia listened to everything in silence, without judgment, without offering empty advice. She just held his hand at one point and told him that he was stronger than he imagined. And there, in that gesture, Jonathan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, acceptance without obligation. A touch without demands. A presence that didn't require explanations. Their meetings became frequent. Sophia was light where there was shadow. She didn't try to fill the void with promises, she was just there, constant. And Jonathan, little by little, came out of his shell. He started talking more, laughing more, looking to the future without so much fear. Amanda, in turn, tried to rebuild herself inside an empty house. She cut ties with her lover, ended her art course, sought therapy. Not for Jonathan. But for herself. Because only then did she understand that, in order to move forward, she needed to face her own abysses. She spent her nights remembering moments when she could have done things differently, but now she knew that regret didn't buy back time. Time passed. A month, then 2. Until one day, Amanda decided to write one last letter. Without asking for forgiveness, without trying to win him back. She simply wrote everything she had never had the courage to say. She spoke about her silent loneliness, about the vanity that led her to seek in others what she should have resolved within herself, about how much she had despised sincere gestures because she believed she needed fireworks. She simply asked him to be happy. And she put the letter in the mail, without waiting for a reply. Jonathan read the letter days later, sitting on the same park bench where he had taken refuge that first night. He read each word carefully, without anger, without pain. Only with the serenity of someone who knows that the truth, once revealed, sets you free. And then he got up, walked to the edge of the lake and, on impulse, called Sophia. She answered with the same calm tone as always. He simply said he wanted to see her. And that night, without promises and without fear, Jonathan went to find a new beginning, with someone who didn't need to understand his past to want to be by his side in the present. The story with Amanda was over. But life, finally, was beginning again. The envelope containing the letter remained folded on the table for days after reading it, like a sort of tangible trace of the cycle that was finally coming to an end. Jonathan didn't reply. He didn't tear it up, he didn't save it. He just left it there, with no urgency to delete it, but also no intention of revisiting those words. He had accepted everything. There was no more anger or expectation. Only understanding. It was strange, even uncomfortable at a certain point, how time rearranged feelings within us without asking permission, without announcing it. He didn't want justice, nor confession. What Amanda said in the letter no longer mattered as justification or excuse, but as a worthy end to a story he had already left behind. Meanwhile, she continued in silence. She avoided looking, avoided insisting, but at the same time, she couldn't free herself from his presence within her. It was like a constant echo in every corner of the house, in every song that played on the car radio, in every scent stored in the fabrics in the closet. The days that had previously seemed long with him by her side now stretched out in absolute emptiness, a silence that offered no rest. Amanda tried to move on with her life. She changed the furniture in the living room, donated the paintings, bought new books to fill the shelves. But everything she did seemed like a frustrated attempt to cover her tracks. The truth is that nothing she did now could undo the choices she made when she thought she still had time to go back. Jonathan, on the other hand, continued to live the new with the ease of someone who didn't want to rush. Sophia was patient, and perhaps that was why her presence was healing. They didn't talk about the past often, not out of fear, but by choice. It was as if they both understood that the pain didn't need to be relived in order to continue existing somewhere. It was there, yes, but now it only served as a basis for more conscious, more complete decisions. Jonathan didn't talk about love. Not yet. But he smiled more easily, slept more peacefully, and recognized himself again in the mirror with a dignity he thought he had lost. The days with Sophia came with a rare sense of normality, walks without a plan, dinners without obligations, conversations without filters. For the first time in a long time, he felt whole with someone, not out of necessity, but by choice. And then came the dilemma. An invitation arrived in the mail, addressed to him and Amanda, for an event that had been planned months before, the wedding of a mutual friend couple, with whom they had long-standing ties. Jonathan no longer had frequent contact with them, but he knew that Amanda would probably attend. Sophia, upon learning of the situation, showed no jealousy or discomfort. She simply asked if he wanted to go. He hesitated. Being there, in the same environment, after everything that had happened, seemed like a risk. But at the same time, he felt that he had to face that situation. Not for her. For himself. He no longer wanted to feel intimidated by the past. He decided that he would go. And she would accompany him, with the discretion and sensitivity that she always offered. The venue was an outdoor space, surrounded by trees and lights strung between the branches. The atmosphere was light, the guests were cheerful, and the music filled the room with a joy that clashed with the invisible tension that grew in Jonathan with each step. Amanda was there. And when she saw him enter with Sophia by his side, she froze for a second. Her body reacted before her mind could even process it. She hadn't expected to see him, and much less so like that, calm, confident, accompanied. It took her a while to look away, and when she did, her chest burned with a cruel mix of longing and regret. During dinner, they inevitably met eyes. There was no wave, no smile. Just the silent recognition of two people who carried within themselves a past they didn't quite know how to name. Sophia, attentive, noticed everything, but didn't react. Her presence remained calm, and that was enough for Jonathan to keep his posture upright and his gaze steady. But he wasn't immune. Inside him, Amanda's presence still caused discomfort. It wasn't desire, nor doubt. It was like an old thorn that, when touched, still hurt, even after it had healed. And it was in this discomfort that he realized he needed something more. He needed to end that story in a dignified way, not with anger, not with contempt, but with maturity. Later, when the event had already lost momentum and the guests were beginning to disperse, Amanda approached him. She asked for a minute. Sophia discreetly nodded and walked away. Jonathan, out of respect for himself, agreed to listen. They went to a private corner of the garden, where the music was quieter and the air was cooler. Amanda took a deep breath before starting to speak. He said he wasn't there to win her back, that he wasn't expecting anything more than the chance to say what he needed to. He said that he had understood, with time and pain, that betrayals don't come from the other person, but from the cowardice of the one who betrays. He said he was wrong to try to justify what couldn't be justified, that he had destroyed a love that he might never find again anywhere else, and that knowing this was the daily punishment he bore. She said that seeing Jonathan with someone else hurt, but that, for the first time, it wasn't out of jealousy. It was because she finally understood that he had moved on, and she hadn't. Jonathan listened intently. There was sadness in his eyes, but no bitterness. When she finished, he simply said that forgiveness was not something you give as a gift, but as a relief. And that, as strange as it might seem, he forgave her. Not to free her, but to free himself. He said he couldn't take away the pain, but that he had learned from it. And that, in the end, she had pushed him toward a version of himself he might never have known if all this hadn't happened. They returned to the hall in silence. Amanda went to the car alone. Jonathan found Sophia and hugged her more intensely than usual. He felt that he was finally free. And Amanda, as she drove back home, her eyes still full of tears, knew that this would be the last time their paths would cross like this. Because, despite all the attempts to rebuild, some bridges, once burned, can no longer be built. And perhaps, precisely for this reason, her regret was now complete. Because he had finally found peace again. And she, the truth that you had avoided for so long. And there was still an important decision to be made. A choice that would change the next steps of each of them forever. Amanda didn't go home straight away that night. The steering wheel in her hands became nothing more than an automatic instrument, while her mind wandered through everything she had just experienced. She drove down long avenues without noticing the road, guided by memories and regrets that insisted on occupying the passenger seat. She parked in front of a city viewpoint, where the night view made the buildings tiny and the car headlights seemed like the pulses of a world indifferent to the pain someone carried in their chest. He sat on the hood, the wind messing up his hairdo that was still intact from the party, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if they could find an answer there. She now understood that she had reached the limit of what she could do. No justification, no belated gesture, no sincerely shed tears could give back what had been lost. Jonathan had moved on, and there were no more bridges for her to cross. All that was left now was to face herself. Alone. Without artifice, without distractions. Her time to seek redemption with him had run out. And that, painful as it was the only solid truth Amanda could accept. The next morning, Jonathan woke up to light filtering through the blinds of the hotel room where he was now temporarily living. He got up slowly, made a strong coffee, and sat by the window to watch the flow of the street. He was different. Not because the pain had gone away, but because it had been transformed. He no longer carried the tension in his shoulders, nor the anxiety in his hands. He moved with more clarity, with more ease. That final conversation with Amanda at the party had closed the emotional cycle with a strength he had never imagined he needed. It had been like opening a door that had been stuck for a long time and finding behind it not only a corridor of memories, but a clear path. And with that freedom came a new awareness, that his story with Sophia did not have to be a shadow of some old pain. It was not a patch. It was a new fabric. He then decided it was time to leave that hotel. He looked for a new apartment. Small, functional, with good natural light and enough space for the new versions of himself that he was willing to meet. In a few days, the contract was signed. He began to move boxes little by little, packing his clothes, his books, his paintings, not Amanda's, but his own. It was curious to realize how everything that had previously seemed indispensable was now questionable. He re-evaluated each object, each memory, carefully choosing what really deserved space in his new life. The act of changing places, for him, was not just physical. It was symbolic. It was a reconstruction. Sophia helped with the move, but without intruding. She would arrive with bags of groceries, organize the cutlery, place fresh flowers on the table and disappear for hours, leaving him free to find himself. At night, they would sit on the makeshift balcony of their new apartment and talk about everything except the past. They would talk about books, movies, little desires, about life itself. And it was in these conversations that Jonathan began to see something in her that he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just her presence that comforted him. It was the way she respected his silence. How she didn't demand space, but was still present in every detail. It was a kind of love that didn't pressure, that didn't shout. A love that knew how to wait. And it was in this calm moment that the proposal came. A job offer in another country. The company where he worked had been acquired by a multinational, and with the transition, new vacancies in strategic positions had become available. His name had been put forward for one of them. He would have to move for at least a year. It was a real opportunity for growth, a challenge that he would have hesitated to accept some time ago because of the stability of his life as a couple. But now it was different. It was a chance to start over on a different scale. When he told Sophia, she smiled. She asked if he wanted to go. He said yes, but that he didn't know how to leave her. She then calmly replied that he didn't have to leave her. That he could choose to take her with him if he wanted. But above all, she wanted him to be happy, with or without her. Jonathan spent days reflecting on that answer. It was simple. It was true. And, deep down, it was the certainty that, if there was love there, it would survive distance, change, and time. Because it wasn't a love of control, it was a love of freedom. He made his move. He informed the company of his departure, prepared the documents. Meanwhile, Amanda received the news from mutual friends. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't seek him out. For the first time, she silently accepted that he had become unattainable. And that hurt more than any words spoken out loud. The day before the trip, Jonathan stopped by the old house one last time. Not to see her again, but to leave a box with objects she had left behind when she moved. Photographs, letters, mementos. He rang the doorbell and, hearing her footsteps approaching, left the box on the doormat and left. Amanda opened it seconds later. She looked at the box, recognized the name written in her handwriting, and when she opened the lid, she felt a pang in her chest. This was not just a return. It was the definitive closure. The confirmation that he was completely gone. She sat on the floor, holding a photo of the two of them on an old trip, and for the first time, she didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and let the silence take over. Jonathan boarded the plane the next morning. Sophia accompanied him to the airport. The hug was long, intense, but without promises. Just a go. Take care of yourself. And I'll be here. And that was enough. The plane took off, cutting through clouds that, from above, seemed as small as the dilemmas that, on solid ground, seemed like mountains. Jonathan looked out the window, his heart beating fast, not out of fear, but out of excitement. He didn't know exactly what awaited him, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't fear what was to come. Because now, finally, he was whole. Amanda, on the other side, was starting over. Not by choice, but by necessity. And perhaps, in time, she too would find her own form of peace. And even without knowing it, each of them was now walking a completely different path. But both of them, silently, carried within themselves the same certainty: no matter how deep one falls, there is always a chance to get up. But to do so, courage is needed. And sometimes, it is necessary to lose everything that one believed was indispensable, in order to discover what really matters. And now, with the wind's changing direction, all that was left was to hope that destiny, with the same delicacy with which it destroys, would also know how to rebuild. The following fall, when the leaves began to fall like dried-up memories of everything that had once flourished, Amanda received news that, although expected, hit her with brutal force. Jonathan had taken up residence abroad, accepting a new position permanently, building his life in a country she had never set foot in. She found out about it by chance, through a former colleague of his who mentioned the news naturally, as if telling someone about a distant acquaintance. Her name was no longer part of any updates about him. There were no more ties. It was as if her existence had been erased from the narrative of his life. And it was there, in that moment frozen in time, that Amanda understood the cruel meaning of the end. It is not the goodbye that hurts, it is when you realize that the other person has moved so far away that even the sound of their name has become inaudible in your memory. He still lived in the same house, although everything there was different. He had changed the furniture, painted the walls, but the air remained saturated with absence. He had worked hard to rebuild his career, gone back to school, surrounded himself with new people and new cycles, but there was a gap that neither time nor achievements could fill. He slept little. He dreamed too much. And sometimes, when he opened his eyes in the middle of the night, he would reflexively reach out his hand, as if he still hoped to find someone by his side. It was this empty gesture that hurt more than any loneliness. Meanwhile, Jonathan had adapted to the new reality with surprising ease. The city where he now lived was vibrant, demanding, full of stimuli and new learning. The professional challenge kept him centered, but there was also room for other discoveries. The language classes, the walks through unfamiliar streets, the coffees at odd hours, the books in another language that forced him to slow down. All of this formed a daily routine that nourished him, that made him grow as a man, as an individual. Sophia, in turn, remained in her home country, choosing not to embark with him. They both knew that it was not the right time. Their farewell was silent and serene. She remained as a beautiful link in a chapter that did not turn into a definitive romance, but into a rare, solid friendship, made of respect and admiration. They exchanged letters, a few phone calls, but over time, even that became more distant. Jonathan understood that there are things that only come to help with the crossing. And Sophia had been that, a bridge, not a port. One morning, as he was leaving for work, Jonathan passed a young woman who was leaving a flyer at the building's entrance. His gaze fixed on her for a second. There was something in that gesture, in that clumsy haste, that made him smile. It was like looking at an everyday scene with a different kind of attention. In the following days, she appeared a few more times, and without realizing it, they began to exchange greetings. Then a "good morning," then a "how are you," then the shared coffee on the stairs, then the first laugh. Her name was Clara. She worked in design, and she was direct, sensitive, with the manner of someone who had already faced the world without losing her tenderness. Jonathan was in no hurry. He did not seek to replace the past. But with each conversation, with each silence shared effortlessly, something inside him reorganized itself. With her, he learned that love does not have to come in the form of grandeur or eternal promises. Sometimes, it is just that, the peace of not having to explain yourself, the comfort of fitting completely into a simple moment. Meanwhile, Amanda had weekly sessions with a therapist. In the deep conversations she had there, she began to understand the internal mechanisms that led her to lose herself. She spoke little about Jonathan during the meetings. She preferred to use the time to try to understand her choices, her impulses, her sabotages. She discovered that she had been sabotaging herself for years, long before the betrayal, and that the mistake with Jonathan had been just the symptom of a bigger wound, the inability to look inside herself honestly. She began to dedicate time to social projects, resumed an old childhood dream, and in the most intense moments of silence, she began to write a book. Not about him. About herself. And the provisional title said it all, "What's Left of Me." In the solitude that she now accepted, she learned to see beauty in reconstruction, even if it was slow, even if it was full of setbacks. And even though love did not return to her days, she began to recognize that some stories have definitive endings, not because of fate's revenge, but because of the need for evolution. Years later, Jonathan sat on a park bench with Clara by his side, now his life partner. There was no wedding, no spectacular declarations, but there were shared plans and meaningful glances. He was holding an envelope in his hands, an acceptance letter for a social impact project he had created and that had been approved by a large international institution. It was more than professional recognition. It was proof that he had become someone who, even after being destroyed, was able to build something greater from what was left. Clara hugged him tightly. And there, amidst the laughter and pride, he realized that, although love had once died inside him, it had been reborn in another form, more mature, freer, more real. Amanda launched her book at a modest event, surrounded by curious readers and emotional friends. When she went up on stage to thank her, her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. She said that the book was not about guilt or victims, but about choices. She said that we are all capable of hurting the ones we love most when we don't know who we are. And that learning to live with the consequences is, perhaps, the most difficult task of adult life. She received a standing ovation. And that night, returning home alone, she felt a strange serenity in her chest. Not because she was complete, but because she was finally at peace with her broken parts. And that's how the story ended. With a man who rose from the ashes without needing revenge, with a woman who faced her abysses and, instead of denying them, decided to write about them, and with time as the only true judge of the decisions we make when we think no one is watching. Because, in the end, time always watches. And it takes its toll. It takes its toll in silent ways, sometimes late, but always fair. And each character in this story, in their own way, paid the price for their choices. Now, tell me. What did you think of this story? Would you have done it differently? Leave your opinion here in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following stories as intense and real as this one. And remember, cheating doesn't just destroy relationships. It corrodes homes, destroys love, destroys trust, and turns what could be eternal into irreparable ruins. Here, on this channel, we do not support, do not normalize, and will never romanticize any type of betrayal. Our commitment is to show, through fiction, how certain choices have consequences that echo throughout life. See you in the next story.